Frivolous lawsuits are destroying America. If you've ever watched TV or frankly existed in this country for any length of time, you've probably heard some variation on that message about how runaway juries who are handing out million-dollar jury awards are destroying the judicial system, and essentially how anybody who files a lawsuit is trying to scam other people and other businesses out of their money. This is the product of a concerted effort by a small group of corporate actors to try and convince people that they should not pursue their rights in court. It's what's called tort reform. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about tort reform. We're going to talk about what it is, who's behind it, why it is being pursued, and how it affects not only what my firm, SWMW Law, does, but also how it affects other types of lawsuits in the mass tort world. We're going to talk about what a mass tort is, how asbestos fits into that landscape, and we're going to try and address this lie that if you have been injured, you should not file a lawsuit, and kind of address why that's just not true. At the top of the episode, I talked to you a little bit about what the message of tort reform is. And essentially what tort reform is an effort that has been made by a lot of businesses across this country to enact laws that limit a person's ability to fight for their rights in court. And so specifically, what does that mean? It means that there is an effort that has been ongoing for many decades to try and pass laws that do things like put caps on damages that you can get in court. So the reality of what I do as a lawyer is that the only way that really I can make someone whole or try to compensate them is through money. You know, the unfortunate reality of what I do is that I can't turn back time. I can't make someone's cancer diagnosis go away. All I can do is make it so that companies who have hurt individuals have to pay for that injury. And so one of the ways that tort reform advocates try to limit someone's rights in court is that they try to get laws passed to put caps on how much money a jury can award. So, you know, there are different laws in different states, and this gets back to something you'll hear me say a lot on this podcast, which is the laws are different in every state, and you need to talk to a lawyer who is knowledgeable about that law and what the caps, if any, are in your particular state, in your particular set of circumstances. But the fact being that tort reform activists don't like juries having the ability to award what they think is fair. That's really what it gets down to, is that this effort tries to limit a jury's ability to award the amount of money that they think will make an individual right, and that, more importantly, will hold a company accountable for what they've done and try to prevent them, or at least disincentivize them from doing that same harm in the future. Another way that tort reform activists try to limit a person's ability to fight for their rights in court is they try to pass laws that set up a number of hurdles to overcome, set burdens of proof that are higher than they would be in any other type of civil case, put requirements on, you know, types of reports that we have to have experts file in this litigation. And again, it's state by state. Every state is different. But ultimately, the goal is not to, you know, a lot of tort reform activists will say that they're just trying to help our system, right? They're just trying to make things more fair for everyone. They're trying to make sure that our judicial system doesn't bankrupt, you know, good companies who haven't done anything wrong. And while that sounds really good, and I love that in theory, the reality is that the real purpose of all of these rules and all of these restrictions is to try and get it so that companies don't have to pay for when they've hurt people. That is ultimately what this is about. Is it about limiting how much money a company has to pay when they have hurt people, when they've poisoned people, and frankly, when they've killed individuals? It is funded by a very well-funded group of businesses. One example, well, I guess I shouldn't give examples so that I don't get in trouble, but The point being that there are think tanks dedicated to this. There are groups of businesses who their sole mission is to go throughout every state in the United States to try and get new rules to make it harder for individuals to try and exercise their constitutional right to a trial by jury in court. They've also done this through what I would call sort of a soft power approach, right? It's not just that they're enacting new rules and new laws and trying to make things more procedurally difficult. This entire effort by the tort reform, boosters have also tried to, get people to believe that, it's bad, that it's morally bad to file a lawsuit. And I can't tell you how many people have walked through my doors and have told me, hey, yes, they have cancer, they've been exposed to asbestos, we have the proof, and they tell me, well, I'm not the type of person to file a lawsuit. I'm really not. The message being, which they have come to believe and most people believe, is that there is a type of person who files a lawsuit. And that type of person is someone who's trying to scam the system. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. That is what tort reformers want. They want people believing that if they go to a lawyer or if they seek out help, that what they're doing is trying to get money for nothing, trying to get money for free. And in this country, we are made up of people who are hard workers who aren't looking for a free pass. And so if if people end up believing this lie that, well, if you file a lawsuit, that makes you bad individually, or that means that you're trying to scam something out of a company, that just simply isn't the case. One thing that I like to tell people is, individuals have a lot of, concerns about being seen as like trying to get money for nothing. Well, who doesn't have that worry? Who never worries about hiring a lawyer and suing? As businesses and corporations who are trying to protect their business. There are no qualms that they have about calling a lawyer. And so if they're not worried about calling a lawyer and suing over times when they've been injured, you also should not be worried about calling a lawyer and fighting for your rights. That is just simply the reality of our judicial system. It's particularly dangerous in things like asbestos litigation. And when we have people who come into our office with mesothelioma and lung cancer, because again, this is a cliche to say, but it's true, this is a David and Goliath type of battle. We are representing, at my firm, at SWMW, we represent individuals. And again, we're not representing people who have unlimited resources. We represent hardworking people, usually blue-collar people, who have all they've tried to do over the course of their life is just make enough to support their family and to get by. Who we sue in these lawsuits are corporations and companies with deep pockets who know that this was going to be a problem and who have made millions and millions of dollars over trying to get around safety regulations, out of making products that they knew were dangerous but were cheap. And so we are going up against a well-funded group of companies that also have this tort reform mission of trying to get it harder and harder for people to fight for their rights. That certainly doesn't scare us at my law firm. We're used to that, and we are ready and equipped to fight that battle. But it's something that we have to be honest about, and we have to address the concern that a lot of people have, that if they even so much as call a lawyer, that's some proof that they're a bad person individually, and that just simply is not true. More broadly, the tort reform, effort in this country not only tries to limit people's ability to seek compensation in court, but it affects directly what we do at my law firm and more broadly, the landscape of mass tort litigation. So if you're first time listening to this podcast, you may not know what a mass tort is or kind of what I'm even talking about. Basically, mass tort is just another word to talk about any type of range of lawsuits where there is one sort of either product or one type of substance that has caused harm to a lot of different people. And so if you watch the news with any regularity, you probably have seen mass tort reporting about certain pesticides, about talc, about certain medications, where there's a specific medication, for example, that may cause heart failure for the vast majority of the people that take them. And so that's all mass tort is it is a group of many lawsuits all kind of arising out of one product or one substance that has caused harm to a lot of different people. And so why that matters for my law firm is, asbestos is, for lack of a better phrase, the OG mass tort, right? Asbestos is one of the first substances that really caused a wave of lawsuits starting in the 1970s and going all the way through today, all centered around this one substance, which is asbestos, which is a mineral. And this has been one of the longest running sets of lawsuits over the course of American legal history. One thing that people do get confused about, however, and because none of this, is easy to understand if you're not a practicing lawyer who does this all the time, one thing that I need to clarify is that mass torts are not class actions. So you may have heard about class actions, which are similar, but they're different. Class actions involve one lawsuit that represents a lot of different people, right? It may be thousands of people involved in one lawsuit against a company. Mass torts are a little different. So as with asbestos and any other type of mass tort, for example, what we do at my firm is we don't file class action lawsuits about asbestos exposure. We file individual lawsuits on behalf of individual people against a number of different companies who all made asbestos-containing products or had asbestos on their property. And so that's the way it's a little different. A lot of people can understandably become confused and ask us, when they come in, like, oh, well, is this part of a class action? Well, no, we litigate on behalf of one person at a time against a number of different companies. What you can expect as a client at our law firm being a part of that is really no different than if you had an individual lawsuit about a car wreck, for example, or about a slip and fall. We do not handle our clients on a group approach, right? Every single one of our clients has an individual case that will receive individual attention. It just happens to exist in this larger landscape of a lot of lawsuits all going on at once about, in our case, asbestos exposure. There's also the concept of multi-district litigation, which is a specific process that exists for other types of mass torts. And without getting too deep into the weeds on that in this particular episode, if we're talking about things like pesticides or medications or certain type of medical devices, sometimes if there are a lot of lawsuits that are filed over those types of products, they may get drawn into what's called an MDL, or a multi-district litigation arena, which is where one judge presides over lawsuits filed all over the country. There are different ways that the MDL exists and how it's administered. Suffice to say that the whole goal of that is to try and resolve claims for people as quickly as possible. And if there is merit to that particular type of lawsuit against a medical device or against a pesticide or against another type of product, that all of those claims are addressed at once in an efficient way. At least that's the goal, is to try and address things efficiently as possible. That's a little different than what we do at my law firm, but it is certainly part of the landscape of doing this type of litigation, and something that's helpful for people to know, because again, they may have questions. You may be confused about how these things work, and it's understandable because the system itself is very confusing, even for lawyers who have passed the bar. If you talk to lawyers who don't do this type of work, they may not know anything about how this process works, and it's not because they're dumb, and it's not because they're not smart. It's just because this system can be very confusing unless you're in it day in and day out. We're going to talk today about some more, just to shift gears, we're going to talk about some more myths versus facts. We've talked about those before, kind of addressing what people believe. And again, just this whole process can be very confusing. And there's a lot of myths that can come up that people believe are true that just frankly aren't true. One of those myths is that mass tort lawyers just file cookie cutter claims. Now, I will tell you that a lot of these claims have very similar allegations. And I think that's where this myth comes from, right? Is that, well, all these lawyers, they all do the same thing. They're all filing the same lawsuit. All the language is the same. So then, what does it matter, right? Well, part of that is true, right? Because let's take asbestos, for example. The story of the cover-up of asbestos, what companies did to try and get out of the dangers of asbestos coming out, what they did in response to finding out that asbestos could cause disease, that playbook is very similar across cases. That's not going to change based on individual experiences. So in a sense, every lawsuit is very similar in asbestos land, right? There are going to be a lot of the same allegations that companies knew or should have known that asbestos was dangerous, that they used it in their products, and that they didn't take it out when they knew it could cause cancer. So that doesn't change. But the fact part of addressing this myth is that even if we're addressing the same playbook every single time, each client is different. Each individual's exposure is unique. Everyone's experience is different. And that's where our expertise and our skill comes in to decipher what needs to be brought out, what needs to be highlighted, addressing where each client is different and how their exposures were different. So even if the lawsuit itself may look very similar from case to case to case, that has no reflection on how we as a firm at SWMW actually handle that case, because every case is different and we have to address the differences in every single case, every single time, basically. Moving along, another myth, these cases drag on forever and clients never see a dime. Well, again, similar to the first myth of, there's actually a little bit of truth to this, and I got to be real with you. Lawsuits take a lot of time, and from the starting point to the finish point, we might be talking about, a case lasting a couple of years. And that's because that's how the system works. That is how litigation works. And the judicial system is just slow. There's no way around it. There are certain rules and regulations that slow things down and which we have to follow, and that other parties have to follow as well, which ends up helping, us in the way that it helps other companies. But that being said, the way that asbestos is a little different that I think it's important to note is that the vast majority of our cases involve many different companies. And so we will name whoever we think is responsible for an individual's cancer or their disease. We'll name a number of different companies, and we don't wait until the very end to try and settle with those individual companies. And so the way that it typically looks over the course of a lawsuit for our clients is that we will file a lawsuit, and the entire process from start to finish may indeed take several years. But over the course of that several years, we are actively trying to get compensation for our clients anywhere that we can. And so if we can settle a case with one company in the middle of a lawsuit, we will do that, and we'll continue fighting with the other companies that haven't settled yet. There's also a process that we can tap into, which is called a bankruptcy trust system. And again, without getting too deep into the weeds, those are trusts that have been set up outside of litigation. They exist outside the courthouse, where we can apply for compensation to individual trusts. And we do that over the course of the life of a lawsuit. So even though, like I said, being very real, from start to finish, lawsuits do take a long time and they do drag on, and it can be frustrating. But the reality is that that is very normal. That is typical for these types of lawsuits, especially. And to address the second part of clients see nothing, that is just not how we handle our cases. Again, we don't get paid unless you get paid. So if we're not getting settlements for you, guess what? We're not making any money. So there is absolutely an incentive for us to get you paid, because frankly, that keeps our lights on, and we want that as well to continue fighting for all of our clients. So as soon as we're able to resolve a claim successfully on your behalf, that money gets funded, it goes to you. Obviously, we can't promise you anything, and I would be doing not only a disservice to you if I were to promise you I could get you money for something, but I'd also be breaking the law, which I don't want to do. So we can't promise you anything, but if the evidence is there, and if we can link up that evidence and prove your case in court, there's a very good likelihood that we will get you some form of compensation, and that as a firm, we, disperse those funds as quickly as we get them. Finally, the myth being you have to be dying to qualify. The unfortunate reality of what we do is that usually there has to be some sort of illness, right? There has to be either a cancer diagnosis or some sort of disease that has been diagnosed by a medical doctor. Again, part of what's difficult about this job is that most of the time, most of the clients that I work for and the rest of our team work for, they unfortunately are dying. And that's part of what makes this job not only very difficult, but also what makes it meaningful, is that we are working for very sick individuals. People who have cancer, who have mesothelioma, who are getting chemo, who are getting radiation, who are, quite frankly, towards the end of their life. It's not always the case, but we deal with that a lot. That being said, we also have had a number of clients who don't die, who beat their cancer, and we celebrate with them just along with their family. When our clients beat cancer, that is a good day in our office. And so obviously that's what we hope for. That's what we try to make sure happens by getting them compensation, try to get those people the medical care that they need. But the reality is that, whether you beat your cancer, whether you don't beat your cancer, whether you have a loved one who passes away from their disease, that ultimately does not have a bearing on whether or not you are qualified to bring a case in court. What matters is that there's an injury, and what matters is that we can get the evidence to link up that injury to exposure to asbestos. And so again, as with everything, if any of this is sort of a question in your mind, you're not really sure, well, am I sick enough? Is my disease a qualified disease? Like all these things, these are all questions that you should be reaching out to an attorney who handles this specific type of litigation, so that they can answer those questions for you and kind of help you along in your specific circumstances. That's it for today's episode. I appreciate you listening to the Asbestos Files. If you or someone that you know has been diagnosed with an asbestos-related disease and you need somebody to talk to, please reach out to a lawyer. You can reach us. I've got the link in the show notes of how you can get in touch with my firm, SWMW Law. On the next episode, we're going to be talking about specific types of exposures to asbestos, and specifically being in the armed forces, being a veteran, and how that may expose you to asbestos. I'm Sophie Zavalia. I'm here at SWMW, where we believe that people matter, and I appreciate you listening. Thank you.